My mother hosted a birthday dinner, then turned to me and said, "We all know you'll just ruin tonight like you always do." My cousin snorted, "Classic you." I just smiled, pulled out a small envelope, and said, "Read this out loud, Grandma." She did. Then gasped. It was raining the night of my grandmother's birthday, the kind of cold, early spring rain that made everything feel heavier. I drove to my parents' house in Glenview, Illinois, the same house I grew up in, the same house that never really felt like a home. I parked my car a little down the block. There was already a lineup of SUVs and sedans in the driveway, mostly belonging to relatives who only showed up for photo ops and free food. I sat in the car for a minute before going in. My hands rested on the envelope in the passenger seat. Cream-colored, thick cardstock, sealed neatly. It wasn't big or flashy, but it was loaded with the kind of information that could change the dynamics of a family in under 5 minutes. I wasn't sure I'd have the guts to use it. But I'd brought it, just in case. Walking into the house was like stepping into a theater production. The chandeliers were lit, candles flickered across the long formal dining table, and the smell of roasted meat and herbed potatoes floated through the air like bait. My mother, Catherine, was already busy moving plates around like a general surveying a battlefield. She wore her pearls, like always, and a strained smile that barely masked the tension underneath. She spotted me, nodded once, and went back to instructing the caterers. I scanned the room. There was my cousin Brielle, tall, blowout hair, tailored blazer over a silk blouse, wine glass already in hand and perched on the edge of the living room couch like she was posing for a magazine. My brother Russell had flown in from Boston with his wife, whom he never let out of arm's reach. He was chatting with my Uncle Lawrence about real estate investments. No one noticed me arriving, not really. I walked over to Grandma Agnes, seated near the fireplace in a velvet armchair. She smiled when she saw me, a real, warm smile, and held out her arms. I leaned down, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Grandma." She patted my hand and asked how my cat was doing. That was Grandma, she never forgot the small things. Dinner was called shortly after. The table was long and immaculately set, with printed name cards at each place. I was, of course, seated near the end, not at the kids' table, but certainly not in the inner circle either. My mother stood at the head and gave a short speech about family, legacy, and gratitude. When she raised her glass, everyone followed suit. The meal began with small talk. Brielle was loudly recounting her recent business trip to San Diego, where she apparently convinced a group of surgeons to sign a $300,000 supply contract. My mother nodded along proudly. Russell was discussing the renovation of his kitchen, all marble and brushed brass, of course. I ate quietly, mostly listening, occasionally offering a comment if asked. Then, mid-meal, my mother turned to me and, with a tight-lipped smirk, said the words I'd heard too many times in my life, "We all know you'll just ruin tonight like you always do." Just loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. She said it like a joke, but not a single person laughed in amusement. Except Brielle. She took a long sip of wine and said, "Classic you." No one defended me. Not Russell, not Uncle Lawrence, not even my dad, who just stared at his plate like it wasn't happening. It wasn't the first time I'd been humiliated like this in front of my own family. But it would be the last. I smiled. Not angrily. Not sarcastically. Just calmly. The kind of smile people misread. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I walked over to where Grandma sat at the head of the table and held it out to her gently. "Grandma," I said, "I brought something I think you should read. It's for you." Her hand shook slightly as she opened the flap. She took out the papers inside and began reading. Her voice, though a bit frail, still held the weight of a woman who'd raised 4 children and outlived 2 husbands. At first, the room didn't pay much attention. But when she read, "This document certifies the legal transfer of ownership of the property located at 912 Evergreen Lane to Lara Winfield," the air changed. She paused. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. Brielle froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Grandma blinked and read again, slower this time. The letter went on to explain that she, Grandma Agnes, had signed over her house to me weeks ago. Quietly. Legally. With 2 witnesses and a notary present. She had decided that I, of all people, should inherit her home. Not because I had money, or prestige, or charm. But because I had always been there for her. Every Tuesday afternoon, I came over with soup. I took her to her doctor's appointments. I sat with her when her arthritis flared up and massaged her hands. I helped her pick out comfortable shoes online when walking became hard. I listened to her stories, not because I had to, but because I loved hearing them. I had never done those things with an agenda. But maybe, deep down, she knew I needed something solid in my life. Something safe. Something of mine. My mother's voice broke through the stunned silence. This is ridiculous. You don't know what you're doing, Mom. You can't just give her your house. That's manipulation. Grandma didn't flinch. She folded the document, placed it gently back in the envelope, and handed it to me. Then she turned to my mother and said, "She's the only one who visits me when it's not a holiday." That landed like a punch. There was no screaming after that. Just silence. The kind that makes every movement sound louder than it is. Brielle finally set her wine down. Russell looked away, uncomfortable. Uncle Lawrence murmured something about needing to take a call and stepped outside. My mother sat in disbelief, her hands clenched in her lap. I returned to my seat and finished my meal. Grandma chatted with me about her garden like nothing had happened. Like the tectonic plates of our family hadn't just shifted beneath our feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or say, "I told you so." I just let it settle. Let them all feel the weight of what it meant for the invisible daughter, the family disappointment, to suddenly be the one holding the keys. After dinner, people drifted into their usual cliques like clockwork. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, though for once, she wasn't barking orders or correcting someone's posture. She moved mechanically, clattering dishes just a little louder than necessary. A few relatives helped clear plates, mostly to avoid eye contact. The room felt like it had lost its center of gravity. I stood beside Grandma, helping her into the living room. She walked slowly, holding on to my arm. Once she was seated comfortably in her chair, she looked at me with a knowing expression, not quite a smile, but something deeper, maybe even relief. She didn't say much, just patted my hand. As I turned to leave the room, I noticed my father standing near the hallway, watching me. He cleared his throat and said softly, "You knew this would blow everything up." It wasn't accusatory. Just tired. I paused. No. I hoped it wouldn't. But I knew it might. He looked down, then nodded. "Your mother's going to say this was your plan all along." "I didn't ask for the house," I said. "She offered." He nodded again, slower this time, and walked past me without another word. That was always his way, present, but never engaged. When I was younger, I used to think if I just tried harder, he'd step in, defend me, notice. But over the years, I realized some men avoid confrontation so deeply they'll let their own children drown in silence. In the days following the dinner, my phone barely rang. No one followed up. No text from Brielle, no call from Russell. My mother didn't reach out at all. And yet, I felt lighter. Like something had snapped, not in a violent way, but like an old rope finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. The following weekend, I returned to Grandma's house, my house now, technically, to go over paperwork and help her with her medications. It was a quiet Saturday. We sat together in the kitchen, drinking lukewarm tea, while she sorted her pill containers. "I want you to move in," she said casually, like she was asking me to pass the sugar. I blinked. "Are you serious?" She looked up, her pale blue eyes sharp. "Yes. The upstairs is just collecting dust. It's yours now. You should be here." I'd been living in a modest apartment for years, small, second floor, noisy radiator, paper-thin walls. It wasn't bad, just impersonal. The idea of living somewhere warm, filled with memories, even complicated ones, felt foreign. "I'll think about it," I said. But we both knew I already had. The moving process started slowly. A box or two on weekends, some books, a lamp, extra clothes. I didn't make a big announcement to the family. What was the point? They already knew. And besides, I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me, and for her. About a month in, I bumped into Russell at the grocery store. He was in town for a work conference and looked startled to see me in the produce section. "You moved in?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. I nodded. "Mostly. Still finishing up the bedroom." He shifted uncomfortably. "It's a lot, Lar. You know, this whole thing." I smiled. "It is. But it's done." He opened his mouth like he might argue, maybe defend our mother, maybe ask me to explain, but then just said, "Take care of her." "I always have." He nodded once and walked off with a bag of spinach and guilt clinging to his shoulders. Meanwhile, my mother had launched her own subtle war campaign. She wasn't confrontational, not directly, that would have been too unrefined for her, but I heard through the grapevine that she'd been telling the extended family that Grandma was being manipulated. That the paperwork was rushed, or forged. That I had pressured her when she was confused. When I spoke to Grandma about it, she sighed and said, "Let her talk. She's been talking over people her whole life." Still, the damage wasn't just emotional. My mother tried to involve a lawyer, some family friend she golfed with, but he didn't get far. The documents were sound. The notary was real. The witnesses included a nurse and a neighbor. There was nothing for her to unravel, and she hated that more than anything. That summer, I planted flowers in the garden bed that lined the front porch. Grandma watched from a shaded chair on the lawn, occasionally pointing to a spot I'd missed. "You always forget to separate the roots," she said. I rolled my eyes and replanted. It became our routine. She'd supervise. I'd comply, with mock annoyance. Occasionally, neighbors would stroll by and wave, some stopping to chat, mostly curious. Glenview was the kind of town where everyone knows whose name is on what deed. A few gently asked if it was true that the house now belonged to me. I answered the same way each time. "It's complicated." But yes. And it was complicated. It wasn't just about real estate or inheritance. It was about finally being seen, about carving out a space in a family that had always treated me like background noise. And in a strange way, I didn't even blame them. Not entirely. Families don't fall apart in one blow. They rot slowly, one small dismissal at a time. One comment. One rolled eye. One holiday where your chair at the table is just a little farther away than everyone else's. I just decided I didn't want to be pushed to the edge anymore. Grandma's health started to slip as fall approached. She moved slower. Ate less. But she was still sharp, still full of stories, and still fiercely loyal to her choice. On quieter days, she'd ask me to pull out her photo albums. We'd sit for hours, flipping through pages, laughing at old haircuts, pointing out dresses she'd sewn herself in the 60s. "You've always been mine," she said one day, out of nowhere. "Even when they acted like you weren't one of them." I didn't cry. Not then. I just held her hand. But deep down, I knew we were both waiting. Waiting for the next thing. The next confrontation. The next moment when the family would stop pretending to ignore the shift and actually do something about it. And I didn't know if I was ready for that yet. It came sooner than I expected. Late September. The leaves in Glenview were starting to crisp, and there was a damp chill in the air that clung to your sweater after dark. I'd just come back from picking up groceries when I saw my mother's car parked across the street from the house. She wasn't inside it. I froze for a second, just long enough for the sinking weight in my chest to hit. My first instinct was to check on Grandma. I dropped the grocery bag inside the front door and made a beeline to the living room. There she was, sitting in her chair, a half-empty tea mug on the end table. My mother was sitting across from her, stiff, back straight, legs crossed, hands folded tightly in her lap. The last time I saw that expression, I was 17 and had come home with a bad haircut and the wrong friends. Grandma looked at me and nodded, slowly, as if to say, "I'm fine." My mother, however, didn't look at me at all. She kept her eyes fixed forward, as if she was addressing an audience in her head. "I thought it was time I visited my mother," she said calmly, her tone rehearsed. "Since some of us have made it difficult to do so without drama." I said nothing. Just closed the front door behind me and moved into the room. Grandma looked irritated but too tired to match my mother's energy. "I'm not stopping you from visiting," I said. "You're always welcome to see her." "But if you're here to argue about the house again," "I'm not arguing," she interrupted, still not meeting my eyes. "I'm stating facts. I think it's worth re-examining how this was all handled. I've consulted with someone who specializes in elder decision-making. There's a legal gray area when someone over 85 signs over property without proper oversight." I laughed, before I could stop myself. "You mean when they don't sign it over to you?" That was when she finally looked at me. There it was, the real her. The one behind the church smile and string of pearls. Her lips pressed together, her nostrils flaring ever so slightly. "She's not well," she said, gesturing vaguely to Grandma. "You're taking advantage of that." "Mom," Grandma said sharply, and it startled even me. "Don't." My mother looked back, momentarily thrown. Her voice lost that icy certainty. I just don't understand why." "You never tried to understand her," Grandma replied. "Lara may not have the flash, or the income, or the crowd you like to show off to. But she has something you never had, loyalty." I stood frozen in the doorway. The words weren't particularly loud, but they hit the room like a dropped piano. "She never once asked me for anything," Grandma continued. "She came because she wanted to. You call every other month and talk about nothing but yourself." For a moment, my mother looked small. She wasn't the woman who curated every holiday and dictated every seating chart. She looked like a child again. And I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she stood up, adjusted her blouse, and turned to me. "You've been waiting your whole life for this," she said, her voice shaking now. "To play the martyr. To finally win. Well, I hope it feels good." I didn't respond. Not with words. I just stepped aside so she could pass. She brushed by me, perfume sharp, heels clicking across the floor like punctuation marks. She didn't slam the door. That wasn't her style. She closed it gently, deliberately, like a curtain falling on a scene she hadn't rehearsed for. After she left, I sat beside Grandma again. She took my hand. "She won't stop," she said softly. "I know. But she can't undo this." "I know that too." We sat in silence for a long time. In October, the letter started. Not from her directly. From a lawyer, one of those suburban firms that specialize in wills, HOA disputes, and business closings. It was all bark, no bite. Request for review, concern for mental clarity, alleged undue influence. My lawyer called it grasping. Still, it stirred the pot. Brielle sent a text. Just one line, "Why are you doing this to the family?" I didn't respond. Russell left a voicemail, "I'm staying out of it, but maybe talk to Mom. She's not sleeping. She says she's worried about Grandma." Worried. Right. The house, meanwhile, felt heavier than ever. I moved fully into the upstairs room and started shifting some of Grandma's things downstairs to make her space safer, fewer stairs, less walking, better light. We found a good part-time nurse to help on weekdays. The rhythm of our lives settled into something real. Something domestic. On rainy nights, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and just exist. And sometimes that was enough. Just being. Without defending, proving, or chasing approval that was never going to come. But then, one night, I got a call from the nurse, something about Grandma's breathing being shallow, her appetite off. Nothing alarming, she said. But it sent a chill down my spine. I rushed home. By the time I got there, she was already in bed, dozing lightly. I sat beside her, took her hand. She opened her eyes and smiled. "You always come back." "Always," I said. That night, I stayed up reading in the hallway, just in case she needed anything. Around midnight, I heard the front gate creak. I looked through the curtain. My mother, again. This time, she didn't knock. Just stood at the edge of the porch in the dark, staring at the house. Maybe she thought no one could see her. Maybe she didn't care. After a few minutes, she walked away. After that night, she never came back to the house. Not directly, anyway. She made one last attempt through a mediator, a suggestion that perhaps the house could be shared as a family asset, a thinly veiled pitch for turning Grandma's home into a vacation rental for the grandchildren's college funds. It was laughable. My lawyer responded with a single-page letter that essentially said, "No. Permanently." And that was that. The quiet afterward was almost eerie. Like walking into a room that had always been filled with noise and realizing you liked the silence better. The call stopped. The letters dried up. Even Russell and Brielle disappeared back into their curated lives, where dinner parties and renovations were more comfortable than family reckonings. It's strange how people treat the truth. When it benefits them, they cling to it. When it challenges their ego, they call it betrayal. Grandma's health stabilized that winter. With the help of her nurse and a few modifications to the house, she managed well. We watched a lot of Turner Classic Movies, played endless games of Scrabble, and spent evenings reading aloud from dusty novels she'd saved since the 1950s. Some days, she didn't say much, but when she did, her words always carried weight. "I hope you don't waste time trying to fix them," she told me one evening. I knew who she meant. "I'm not," I said. "I'm done begging for space at a table I helped set." She smiled at that. Spring came early that year. Glenview thawed faster than usual, and daffodils popped up on the front lawn like yellow exclamation points. I painted the shutters. Bought a second-hand porch swing. Started a garden in the backyard. Little things that made the house feel like mine. Then came the letter that changed everything, and not in the way my mother had hoped. It wasn't from a lawyer or a relative. It was from the local historical society. Apparently, Grandma's house, built in 1927, with its original windows and hand-carved banister, had been identified as a preservation candidate. They'd been tipped off by an anonymous neighbor, my guess, Mr. Henley, 2 doors down, who loved old houses almost as much as he loved gossip. If I agreed to a few minor renovations and a yearly open house event, the house would be granted protected status, and I'd be eligible for state-funded maintenance grants and tax reductions. I took it as a sign. I went all in. I worked with the preservation board. Hired a contractor. Brought in Grandma's old photo albums to document how the house had changed over time. The process took months, but when it was finished, I stood on the porch with a local journalist for the Glenview Gazette and smiled as they snapped a photo of me and Grandma beneath the newly installed plaque that read, "Winfield House, established 1927, home of Agnes and Laura Winfield." The story ran in the Sunday paper. A lovely write-up. Page 2. And sure enough, a week later, I got a text from my mother. Just one line, "You really made it about yourself, didn't you?" I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I typed back, "You made me a ghost in this family for 40 years. I just made myself visible." I didn't wait for a reply. There wasn't one. But the revenge wasn't in the silence. It was in the noise that followed, the open houses, the neighbors walking through, admiring the molding and asking about Grandma's favorite tea set. It was in the documentary segment the local college film students made, featuring interviews with me and Grandma. It was in the school bus tours that stopped by in spring, the kids listening to stories about the Great Depression, told by the woman who lived it. It was in the fact that, for once, I was the one telling the story. And the final stroke? I started a small nonprofit in Grandma's name, Agnes House, to help local seniors without family get assistance with housing paperwork, wills, groceries, or just companionship. The funding came from a grant I applied for on a whim. It was approved 2 months after the preservation announcement. Within the first year, we'd helped 17 people stay in their homes. That did more than any confrontation could have. That was the legacy. As for my mother? I hear she's still hosting dinners, still buying flowers for centerpieces, still maintaining the illusion. But fewer people show up now. Some got tired of the performance. Some moved away. And some, maybe, finally saw what she was really protecting, not the family, but her version of it. I don't hate her. Not anymore. Pity, maybe. But not hate. Because the most satisfying part of all of this wasn't winning the house, or shutting down the letters, or watching her squirm. It was finally learning to live without her approval, and realizing I never needed it in the first place.